come back, then thieves don't deserve a second chance.
Please, I beg you, don't do this.
I warned you. Now get out of my sight.
Please, have mercy. Don't leave me out here.
The gates of the Harrington mansion swung open on a Thursday night, not to welcome anyone in, but to throw someone out. Margaret Owens stumbled onto the wet pavement, her small bag landing beside her in a puddle. Behind her, 3 members of the Harrington family stood beneath the covered entrance, dry and unmoved. "Don't ever come back," said Victoria Harrington, the billionaire's eldest daughter, her voice cutting through the rain like glass. "Thieves don't deserve second chances." Margaret opened her mouth to speak. The gates slammed shut before a single word left her lips. She stood in the storm, soaked to the bone, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the knowledge that she had done nothing wrong. Hello, friends. Welcome to today's story. Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Are you in the United States, Canada, South Africa, Nigeria, the United Kingdom, or Jamaica? We want to know. And stay with us, because what is about to happen to this woman, what she builds from this night forward, and what she walks back into 3 years later, is something you absolutely cannot afford to miss. The Harrington estate sat on the edge of the city like a crown that had forgotten what it meant to earn its jewels. 12 bedrooms. 4 floors. A garden that a team of 5 maintained every week. Iron gates tall enough to make the outside world feel small. From the street, it looked like a place where happiness lived permanently, where nothing broken was ever allowed inside. Margaret Owens had worked within those walls for 11 years. She had arrived at 22, fresh from a small town with a quiet manner and careful hands. She had cleaned the rooms no one visited. She had cooked meals that went half-eaten. She had pressed shirts for a man she rarely saw, ironed tablecloths for dinners she was never invited to sit at, and polished floors that reflected the faces of people who looked through her as though she were made of air. She did not complain. That was not who she was. She had a small room near the back of the estate. A window that faced the garden. A single photograph of her late mother on the nightstand. A Bible with worn edges. And a dignity so quiet most people never noticed it was there at all. George Harrington, the billionaire who owned it all, was rarely home. His empire stretched across 4 countries, and his schedule lived in airports and boardrooms. When he was present, he was not unkind. He nodded when she served his coffee. He once told her the soup was excellent. He was distant in the way that powerful men often are, not cruel, simply somewhere else even when standing in the same room. His family, however, was a different matter entirely. Victoria, the eldest, had never liked Margaret. Not from the first day. There was something about a woman who asked for nothing that made Victoria deeply uncomfortable, as though Margaret's stillness was a silent accusation. His son, Elliot, treated the staff like furniture, present when useful, invisible otherwise. And his wife, Claudia, smiled at Margaret in public and spoke about her in private in ways that would have drawn blood if words could cut. For 11 years, Margaret absorbed it all. She did not gossip. She did not steal. She did not take what was not hers. She worked with the steadiness of someone who understood that her value was not determined by the people who refused to see it. Then came the night everything changed. George Harrington flew to Singapore for a conference that would last 2 weeks. The house was left in the hands of his family, which was the same as leaving it in the hands of a slow fire, comfortable at first, dangerous by the end. On the 3rd night of his absence, Victoria called Margaret into the main sitting room. The room was full. Elliot stood by the fireplace. Claudia sat with her legs crossed, watching. 2 security guards flanked the doorway. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, stood in the corner looking at the floor. Margaret stood in the center of it all and felt the air shift. "We found something," Victoria said. She held up a bracelet. Gold. Delicate. A piece that had belonged to Claudia. Margaret looked at it without flinching. I have never touched that bracelet. It was found in your room, Elliot said. Then someone placed it there. Victoria laughed, not a warm sound. Of course you would say that. 11 years in this house, and we never truly knew who you were, did we? Margaret looked around the room. At Mrs. Chen, who would not meet her eyes. At the guards, who were already moving closer. At Claudia, who was watching with the particular pleasure of someone who had planned this moment carefully. She understood then. This was not a discovery. This was a construction. I would like to call Mr. Harrington, Margaret said quietly. Mr. Harrington is unavailable, Victoria said. And even if he weren't, he would agree with us. Pack your things. You have 20 minutes. Margaret packed in 15. One bag. The photograph of her mother. The Bible. A change of clothes. She walked through the back corridor she had mopped 1,000 times, through the kitchen she had filled with warmth on cold mornings, and toward the front of the house where the gates waited. Victoria, Elliot, and Claudia watched from the covered entrance as the guards walked her out. The rain was falling hard by then. Margaret's bag was thrown out behind her. It landed in a puddle and split at the seam. She turned around once. The gates were already closing. She stood on the pavement in the storm, her clothes soaked through, the city moving around her as though nothing significant had just happened. A taxi passed. A couple hurried by under an umbrella. No one stopped. The mansion lights burned warmly behind the iron gates. She turned away from them. And she walked. Friends, stay with us. Because this woman, soaked, falsely accused, and thrown into the rain with nothing, is about to build something quietly extraordinary. And in 3 years, she will walk back through those gates in a way this family never imagined possible. Do not go anywhere. This story is only beginning. The first night, she slept on a bench inside a bus station. She did not cry. Not that night. Crying felt like a luxury that required energy she could not spare. She had $62 in her purse. She had no references, Victoria had made sure of that, sending messages to the employment agencies they knew, quietly closing every door before Margaret could reach it. She had no family nearby. Her mother had passed 3 years before. She had no husband, no sister, no one waiting with a warm room. What she had was her mind. And the kind of stillness that comes from years of doing difficult work without being seen. The second week, she found a room in a boarding house on the far side of the city. $12 a night. Thin walls. A shared bathroom down the hall. She slept lightly and kept her bag close. She took a job at a laundromat. Then a second job cleaning offices at night. Her hands, which had once pressed fine linen in a 12-bedroom estate, now scrubbed industrial floors in the dark. She did not consider this a humiliation. She considered it a beginning. She ate simply. She saved carefully. And every night, in the small hours before sleep, she thought about the bracelet on the table. About Mrs. Chen's eyes fixed on the floor. About the way Claudia had smiled. She did not let it become hatred. Hatred, she understood, was expensive. It consumed far more than it produced. She let it become fuel instead, a quiet, steady flame she kept carefully controlled. 3 months after her dismissal, she was cleaning an office building late one evening when she noticed a woman sitting alone in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by papers. The woman was crying. Not loudly, the private kind of crying that people do when they believe no one can see them. Margaret knocked softly on the glass. The woman looked up. Her name was Dr. Patricia Ames. She was a financial consultant who had just lost her largest client, who was facing the collapse of a business she had built for 8 years, and who had not spoken to another human being in 3 days in any meaningful way. Margaret sat down across from her. She did not offer advice. She did not pretend to understand business. She simply poured the woman a cup of tea from the flask she carried, placed it on the table, and said, "Whatever it is, you look like you've been carrying it alone for too long." Patricia Ames looked at the woman across from her, this quiet cleaning lady with careful hands and steady eyes, and something in her simply opened. They talked until midnight. Margaret listened in the way she had always listened, completely, without judgment, without the impulse to redirect the conversation toward herself. When Patricia finally ran out of words, she looked at Margaret and said, "You're extraordinary, do you know that?" Margaret smiled gently. "I just know how to be still." Patricia Ames did not forget that night. Over the months that followed, she checked in on Margaret. Quietly at first. Then with more intention. She saw something in Margaret that most people had overlooked, a discipline, a clarity, an unshakable sense of self that could not be taught in any classroom. Patricia began to mentor her. She taught Margaret how to read financial documents. How to identify undervalued property. How to speak in rooms where decisions were made. Margaret learned with the same quiet intensity she had brought to every other task in her life, steadily, thoroughly, without fanfare. She earned her real estate license 18 months after being thrown into the rain. She made her first investment, a small, run-down property on the edge of the city, using savings she had built from nothing, with a loan co-signed by Patricia. She renovated it herself on weekends, learning as she went. She sold it 8 months later for twice what she had paid. Then she did it again. And again. She did not celebrate loudly. She moved carefully, step by step, building something solid beneath her feet. She was not interested in performance. She was interested in permanence. By the end of the 3rd year, Margaret Owens was quietly, undeniably wealthy. Not in the way that required announcements. But in the way that required no apologies. And then, one afternoon, sitting in her modest but comfortable apartment with a cup of tea and a property listing on her laptop, she saw it. The Harrington estate. For sale. George Harrington had suffered significant financial losses, poor investments, a failed business division, a legal settlement that had drained his reserves. The family was liquidating assets. The mansion, the crown, the gates, the 12 bedrooms and perfectly maintained garden, had been placed quietly on the market. Margaret sat with that information for a long time. She did not rush. She looked at the photograph of her mother on the shelf. Then she picked up the phone and called her lawyer. "Friends, we are approaching the moment this entire story has been building toward." 3 years ago, she walked out of those gates with $62 and a split bag. What is about to happen when those same gates open again, and who steps out of that car, is something you will want to see through to the very end. Stay with us. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was addressed to Victoria Harrington, sent from a legal firm she did not recognize. She opened it at the kitchen table, still in her robe, expecting something administrative. She read it twice. Then she called Elliot. Then she called her father. The letter informed the Harrington family that the estate at 14, Crestwood Drive had been purchased in full. The transaction had been completed through proper legal channels. The sale was final. The new owner would take possession in 30 days and would be present on site the following Friday to conduct an initial walkthrough. George Harrington arrived home from his business travel 2 days later, tired and visibly shaken by the financial pressures of the past year. He sat at the head of the dining table, still his, for 30 more days, and listened as Victoria explained. "It sold fast," she said. "The lawyers say the buyer paid above asking. Cash purchase. No negotiation." "Who bought it?" George asked. Victoria hesitated. "The name on the documents is M. Owens Property Holdings." The room was quiet. George looked up. Something moved across his face, not quite recognition, but the beginning of it. Friday came with clear skies and cold morning air. A black car pulled through the gates at exactly 10 o'clock. Not a flashy car. Not an announcement. Just a clean, well-maintained vehicle that stopped in front of the entrance with quiet authority. The door opened. Margaret Owens stepped out. She wore a deep charcoal coat. Simple jewelry. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She carried a leather folder and stood at her full height, which was not great, but which somehow filled the space around her completely. Victoria was the first to see her. The color drained from her face so completely that Elliot reached out to steady her. Claudia, standing to the right of the entrance, made a sound that was not quite a word. George stood at the back of the group, and when his eyes found Margaret's face, he went very still. Margaret walked toward them at a measured pace. She was not hurrying. She had no need to hurry. She had been moving toward this moment for 3 years, and she understood that the most powerful thing she could do right now was simply to be calm. She stopped a few feet from the entrance. She looked at each of them in turn, Victoria, Elliot, Claudia, the way a person looks at something they once feared and have since grown past. Then she looked at George. "Mr. Harrington," she said. Her voice was the same as it had always been. Quiet. Clear. Steady. He nodded slowly. "Margaret." There was a long silence. The garden beyond the entrance was immaculate. The iron gates stood open behind her. The same gates that had slammed shut in her face 3 years ago in the rain. She turned and looked at them briefly. Then she turned back. "I'd like to see the house," she said simply. No one moved to stop her. "Friends, the woman they threw out in the rain has just walked back through the gates as the owner." But the most powerful moment of this story is still to come. What she says inside those walls, and what George Harrington does when he finally learns the full truth, will stay with you long after this story ends. Please, do not leave now. The walk-through took 2 hours. Margaret moved through each room with her lawyer beside her and a notebook in hand, making quiet observations. She paused in the kitchen longest. She stood at the counter where she had prepared 10,000 meals and looked out the window at the garden where she had sometimes eaten her lunch alone. She did not perform emotion for anyone watching. She simply noted what needed to be updated, what she wished to preserve, and what she intended to change. The Harrington family followed at a distance, uncertain of their role in a house that was no longer theirs. When the walk-through was complete, Margaret asked to sit in the main drawing room. They gathered, reluctantly, uncomfortably, around the same space where she had once been accused. George sat across from her. He looked older than she remembered. The confidence that had once surrounded him like a second skin had thinned. The financial losses had taken something from him that money alone could not restore. Margaret placed her folder on the table and folded her hands. "I want to tell you how I came to be sitting here," she said. No one spoke. 3 years ago, I was removed from this house on a Thursday night in the rain. I was accused of stealing a bracelet that was placed in my room by someone in this family. She did not look at Claudia when she said it. She did not need to. I was given no opportunity to defend myself. I was thrown out with $62 and a bag that split when it hit the pavement. George's jaw tightened. "I want you to know," Margaret continued, "that I do not stand here with hatred. I spent the first weeks after that night trying to understand what hatred would give me, and I concluded it would give me nothing I needed. So I set it aside." She paused. "What I took instead was the knowledge of what I was capable of when I had nothing left to lose. That knowledge turned out to be worth considerably more than the bracelet." Victoria looked at the floor. Elliot looked at the window. Claudia was very still. George leaned forward slowly. "Margaret. I need to ask you, I need you to tell me directly. Did my family do this deliberately?" She met his eyes. "Yes." He closed his own briefly. "I learned the truth 6 months after it happened," she said. "Mrs. Chen contacted me. She had carried the guilt long enough. She told me what she had witnessed, and she was prepared to provide a written statement." She opened her folder and placed a single document on the table. She did. George picked up the paper. He read it in silence. When he set it down, his expression had passed through several things: shock, grief, and finally a particular kind of shame that has no remedy except honesty. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. Margaret looked at him for a moment. "I want you to understand that what was done to me was wrong," she said. "Not because I need your acknowledgement to feel that, I have known it since the night it happened. But because the people in this room have never been made to sit with that truth, and sitting with it is the beginning of becoming something better." George nodded slowly. It was not a grand gesture. It was the nod of a man who understood he was being offered something he had not earned. "As for the house," Margaret said, "I purchased it legally and completely. That transaction stands. I do not intend to discuss reversing it." She turned to look at the room around her, the high ceilings, the windows overlooking the garden, the walls that had held her labor for 11 years. "I am not certain yet what I will do with it," she said. "But I know that whatever happens within these walls will be decided by someone who understands what it means to scrub a floor at midnight and still believe in tomorrow." She stood. Her lawyer gathered the documents. She walked toward the door, then paused and turned back one final time. "Mr. Harrington," she said. He looked up. "Your coffee was always 2 sugars and a drop of cold water so it wouldn't be too hot. I remembered that every morning for 11 years. She let that sit for a moment. "I hope someone in your next home remembers it too." She walked out. The gates opened at her approach. She did not look back at them. In the weeks that followed, the consequences arrived quietly, the way real consequences tend to. Victoria and Elliot moved out of the estate and into far smaller accommodations. Claudia left for her mother's home in another city. The social circles they had moved in contracted, not dramatically, not publicly, but in the gradual way that happens when the foundation of a person's power is revealed to have been borrowed. George Harrington remained in contact with his lawyers and began the slow process of rebuilding, financially, and in other ways. He sent Margaret a letter. Handwritten. 3 paragraphs. No excuses. No requests. Only an acknowledgement of what had been done and a statement of regret that carried the weight of a man who finally understood the cost of looking away. Margaret read it once. She placed it in a drawer with the photograph of her mother. She did not reply. But she did not need to. Some things do not require a response. They require only that they be received. The estate at 14, Crestwood Drive became a transitional housing facility 18 months later, a place for women rebuilding their lives after loss or displacement. The rooms that had once held excess now held possibility. The kitchen where Margaret had cooked alone on quiet mornings was now filled daily with the sound of women learning, talking, beginning again. She kept her own small apartment across the city. She did not move into the mansion. She had never wanted the house for herself. She had wanted something far simpler and far more durable than that. She had wanted proof, clear, undeniable, permanent proof, that dignity survives everything that cruelty throws at it. And standing on a quiet Friday morning outside the gates of the house she now owned, watching a woman carry her bags inside and pause at the entrance to take a breath that was clearly the first free breath she had taken in a long time, Margaret had her proof. She turned and walked to her car. The gates closed gently behind her. Not with a slam. Just a quiet, careful click. The kind of sound that means something is safely held. The kind of sound that means someone, finally, belongs. I hope this story stayed with you the way the best stories do, not loudly, but deeply. If it moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and tell us what this story made you feel. We will see you in the next one.